ready?
You ready? Everybody ready?
Okay.
You want to first say your name, title, spell it, right, guys? We're doing
Sure.
a sound check.
Chris McFadden, Kris McFadden. I'm the Deputy Chief Operating Officer with the City of San Diego, and I actually oversee stormwater, transportation, and public utilities. As you can imagine, this has been a very busy week for all of us. And first and foremost, our hearts go out and our thoughts go out to the community has been devastated by this once-in-a-lifetime impact. I think it's important, and we owe it to the community, to really make sure they're getting all the information that's possible, the most accurate information that's possible. And I think, quite frankly, that's starting with talking about Choyas Creek. What is Choyas Creek? And really, I think the best way, I used to teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science. I really like to talk about something I think people can understand and it's valuable to them. And if you can see, this is a watershed of everything that goes into San Diego Bay. Now, while Choyas Creek is just a part of that, is a significant part of an entire watershed. And when I talk about that, this is 1,600 acres throughout not just the city of San Diego, through I-5, I-15, 805, all dump into this watershed. Lemon Grove and La Mesa also contribute to this watershed. And this is a creek that has been around for millennia. It's a creek. It's not when you look at Los Angeles, and they have those big, wide concrete corridors that convey, and aqueducts that convey water. This is a creek. And so when people think about the system, and when you look at one location, you have to really look at the bird's eye view of this entire area. I cannot stress how important that is. And that is the way you get to solutions in this area. So parts of it are hardened, as you've seen, but that's not really going to help the problem. What we have to look at, and what we have been looking at, is a holistic approach to this entire watershed. It doesn't just start at the end, it starts high up into the watershed. As I mentioned, you've seen the devastation in La Mesa and Lemon Grove, and the I-5, I-15 connector, you saw that back up? That all drains into Choyas Creek. So you can see every drainage system in this area was overwhelmed. I think it's also worth looking at the floodplain maps that we have on the table. Choyas Creek typically can convey about a 10-year storm. And even the floodplain maps are outside of Choyas Creek. I think that's really important for everyone to understand. And I like to think of it, you know, those big orange Home Depot buckets, those are 5-gallon buckets. Maybe you have 2 of those buckets, that's 10 gallons. Well, what do you think happens to a 10-gallon bucket when you put 1,000 gallons into it? It is overwhelmed. And so what we're talking about, this was a 1,000-year storm, at least. I was talking to our engineer today, he said the calculations, he actually ran out because it's even most likely higher than a 1,000 storm event. What that means, that's a 0.01% chance, 0.01 at any year of that occurring. Extremely, extremely low probability. Even a storm drain system that were designed to the golden standard today, that's a 100-year storm, would have failed under this situation. Now, I know that doesn't work for cleaning people's homes. It doesn't save their precious memories. But it does serve as an important benchmark for us to meet, and that we know we have to strive and we have to do better, and we are. The only way to fix this area is to re-engineer, but you can't just do hardened infrastructure. You have to look at, it's a biologic community, but it's also an asset to the community. So the plans we have that I'll be describing later treat Choyas Creek not just as a floodway. It's also a creek and it's an attribute for the community, and that's what we envision. I do want to talk about past maintenance because this is a large watershed, so 16,000 acres. I want to remind, that's a scope we're talking about. We have done so much maintenance in this area. I could understand why maybe you don't see it in your own backyard, but we have been working throughout the entire 16,000 acres to make improvements. Just to give you an idea, crews inspected last year 2,200 storm drains and cleaned 547 storm drains and removed 113 tons of material. This is just from Choice Creek. That's not including the rest of the city. Just so far in fiscal year 24, crews inspected over 3,800 storm drains, cleaned 471 structures, and actually have removed more than 7 tons of material from this area. And we're not done yet. Also, in prediction of the storm, which we do acknowledge that was not what anyone was expecting. That was definitely under-predicted storm. We've actually proactively, as we do before every storm, inspect 82 critical storm drain structures just in Choice Creek watershed alone. The city is doing maintenance in Choice Creek. That's very critical. Also, emergency work is currently underway. We started last week, and we're going to continue to be here until everyone is made right. Beta Street maintenance, dredging will be starting this week. This is critical, and while it will not get to a 100-year and will not protect to a 1,000-year storm, God forbid we do not see one of those anytime soon, because we have emergency declarations from the city, which was the first, from the county, and from the state, we're able to enact emergency permitting provisions that we were not able to do so otherwise. That allows us to go in and do this dredging. While it will not protect for a 100-year or 200-year storm, this is an area that needs all the protection we can get as immediately as we can possibly do it, and that's what we're doing. Also, we're going to be continuous work on additional storm drains that we know were impacted from this storm, from everything upstream. We're bringing in not just our own crews, but emergency contractors this week and next week. We know there's a storm predicted for Thursday, a week from today. We're not waiting to get all of this work done in advance of that storm. The real solution here are capital improvement projects. I cannot stress that enough. You could maintain this system all day. If we get another storm event like that, it will happen again. What the city has been doing for years is planning, and this is something a lot of people, and I understand you don't see that. You don't see it until construction happens. And I'm happy to say construction is happening in the Choice Creek watershed. Under this mayor's leadership, we are able to obtain $733 million of low-interest loans, one of the only kind ever in United States history, for a stormwater system to actually get in and do proactive maintenance for infrastructure that's so desperately needed, and at the same time addressing water quality that is so important to our communities. That's $733 million. I'm happy to say many of those millions are actually going to be going to the Choice Creek watershed. So we've recently completed 2 storm drain improvement projects in Labrico Court, and actually others throughout the region and in the watershed. We have in construction right now in Logan Heights, a low impact development projects. And these are ones that not only address water quality, but they slow down floodwaters so it allows these storm events to not be so dramatic in the future. We have 5 construction projects starting this very year, including one in Southcrest Park, over $5.7 million worth of funding that's starting in just a few months that will not only address water quality, but help slow down these floodwaters. We also have a Lomita Street that is going to be starting later this year. These are all flood control and water quality improvements that the community is going to see. Also, we have done past storm drain maintenance in key areas throughout the city. Ocean View Channel was dredged in 2022. Alpha Channel was in Southcrest was also dredged, removing over 2,000 tons of material from these areas, 2,000 tons. Critical, but again, not enough to protect from a 1,000 event storm. And we've even were underway, actually before the storm hit, doing work in Rolando, which is upstream but a critical part of the Choice Creek watershed. So far, we've removed 270 tons of material from that channel in Rolando. But there's more to come. We have a list of over 24 of projects in the Choice Creek watershed. We're really proud to put it out there. We acknowledge we need to do a better job of telling the residents what we're doing, but you have the city's commitment to make this better. And again, the heartfelt apologies and sympathies for what people are having to deal with. And with that, again, I'm providing a high-level overlook. I might not have every detail of every project that's going on. I just got out of the Emergency Operations Center update, so I apologize if I don't know exactly what detail, but I'm sure whatever information I'm unable to provide that answer, we'll get that information for you. Yes?
How does the city prioritize which channels, parts of the channels to clean?
Sure. Well, every year we do an update to the Environment Committee. We did one in November last year. It's actually posted on the city's website. Not only do we take input from the community, we have an annual survey. We ask people what channels are most important to you. But what we have a strategic approach, and we look at risk management. So what is the likelihood of something failing and the probability and consequence of that failing? We have over 200 channel segments throughout the city, and we cannot do all of them, unfortunately, at once. It is important to note that every time we do a storm drain channel, it takes years to prepare. Believe it or not, it takes us a lot longer to dredge something. We can dredge in a week or 2 weeks in some cases. Other areas might be longer. The regulatory process in order to get those permits can be arduous. Now, we've worked with our partner agencies, the resource agencies, to try to streamline things as much as possible. It's important to note, too, we have to get the funding for mitigation. So any acre that we remove of vegetation from these storm drain channels, that is a jurisdictional wetland and is regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Cal Fish and Game, Regional Water Quality Control Board, and if it's in the coastal zone, also the Coastal Commission. All those agencies have to approve all of this work, and we have to mitigate. Every acre is at least an acre, sometimes 2 or more acres, we have to buy mitigation credits for, and this can be millions of dollars.
Do those agencies also have to approve storm drain, like cleaning?
Not storm drain cleaning channels, yes.
How does the city prioritize storm drain cleaning?
Storm-
How many can you do in a year?
Well, we do thousands every year. So, and we have thousands throughout the city, but again, we prioritize it based on risk. We know where our critical drains are, those ones that clog more frequently than others. So we do at least 1 inspection and 1 cleaning per year. That's the baseline, but we know there are these critical drains. There are actually dozens of them in Choice Creek that get a heightened level up to 4 or as many times a year that we need to maintain them. Now, sometimes somebody might see, oh, during this storm drain was clogged. Let me be clear, that bucket analogy, you have that bucket and you have all these drains that are going into that bucket, or hoses coming from La Mesa, Lemon Grove, Caltrans, I-15, all going in the same bucket. So that bucket's full. Once that bucket's full, no drain is going to function, if it's clear or not. So a lot of people said, well, that drain was clogged. Well, it could have been from the storm, but it's important to note that regardless, this storm overwhelmed any engineered system that would be designed today.
So kind of just jumping off that a little bit,
Sure.
we had heard that 2 of the pump stations were out, and you guys were working to repair that.
Mhm.
Then also we had heard that all 6 pump stations were overwhelmed. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about, are those 2 that were out back on, and what do you mean when you say overwhelmed?
And Chris, it might be helpful to repeat the question for them.
Sure. The question were the pump stations that went down during the storm. Number one, they didn't affect Choice Creek. All the pump stations we have in the city are in the coastal areas. They were built decades ago to address coastal development at the time. And you can imagine storm drains are typically a gravity-fed system, but you get so low, particularly along the coast, you have to pump them. So we have 15 throughout the city. There were 2 that were down. They're actually back up and running by the end of today. But they did lead into some problems in the Midway area and of course along the ocean area. And I think that's important to note too. We're managing a system that was designed 50 years ago for a climate that was much different 50 years ago. What used to be a 1,000-year storm, a 0.01% chance of happening every year, that's going to be much more frequent. So that's what the city has really looked at, is re-engineering these, knowing that climate change, all bets are off. And we have to expect this type of storm intensity on a regular basis, and we have to prepare for it, and we have to prepare our residents for it. We owe that to them. But I think that's very clear too. What was the way of doing things in the past is not the way it's going to get us forward.
You
Yes.
mentioned the Ocean View Channel. Is that the same as like the 42nd Street Ocean View?
It's Ocean View and by San Miguel Avenue. They're part of the, we can,
Channel, I think, was behind 42nd Street. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
The same one then?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that some of that was cleaned in 2022. Do we know how much? Because I know the residents said they do remember a crew coming by but just cleaned a small portion. And I mean, is that kind of the way it works? It's just a small section of the whole channel that's drained? Or
so that was 2,000 tons, to give you an idea. And we do channel maintenance. Of course, we have to do it strategically because, like I mentioned before, permits are difficult to obtain and mitigation is difficult to obtain. And actually, we have to be strategic. So we look at those choke points and look to see where we've had past flooding. That all does go into our metrics to determine what's the priority. We do annual inspections of channels every year, at least annually, and we know those shift a lot of times. But that's what sets us up for the next channel maintenance priorities of the following year. But when we go in to do a channel, we have to be very cognizant. We can't do channel clearing often during bird breeding season, and that is during the dry season. That's challenging. So already we're restricted to about half of the year to do this work. And because of environmental regulations, that's often during the wettest part of the year. So you can imagine we have to start, ideally we want to get it done before it starts raining, but that's a real challenge.
And so for the residents who live kind of in that Mountain View area, we're hoping to see some work happening within the next week before the next storm. Will there be any work being done in that particular channel?
Well, what I can tell you, we're starting at Beta Street, and we're going to be working back up into the channel with in-house crews. And we're also bringing on other outside crews to help those other areas. And we'll be able to provide where strategically those locations will be shortly.
But we don't know when this will start? Will it start
It's starting this week.
this week?
Yes. Yes.
So you mentioned the city's identified a certain number of vulnerable storm drains. A lot of people I talked to were very much concerned in southeast San Diego as to when those would be addressed. So do you think that each of those kind of problem areas the city has looked at, will those be addressed before next week's storm?
Yes, we've already started the reinspection. Crews were on site even before the storm and bringing in not only other departments, but other private contractors to help us before Thursday.
Just some numbers questions.
Sure.
Yesterday, 13 Packer trucks had, headed out to help clear some of the debris. Did more go out, and how much debris have they cleared so far? And then 400 homes were damaged, or there was point of a survey. Have those numbers increased? Do we have the latest number?
I mean, so we're specifically talking about stormwater and infrastructure. We'll get you guys updates on all
Okay.
that too if you need, because that's kind of a separate but related
Yeah.
conversation. But this is kind of the intent here is to help you all understand the complexity of the stormwater system and a lot of the questions that residents have, obviously.
Oh, well,
Where are you from?
from the UT.
UT. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
You said 2,000 tons had been cleared. What is that relative to the amount of tonnage that you guys have assessed that you do need to clean up? I mean, 2,000 tons is a large number, but what is it relative to how much work still needs to be done?
And you're talking, so when you said 2,000 tons, that was last year
Yeah.
cleaning that storm, that channel?
Yeah.
Was that in
Mhm.
2022?
2022.
Okay, I just want to make
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
preventative. So how much to remove? I don't have, because the storm changes, all those cubic yards come in from La Mesa, Lemon Grove, I-5, I-15, that we have to accept from those upstream contributors. So I don't have a number for you. But what I want to really focus on, the capital improvement projects. And that's something we're going to be pushing out more and more, a map of showing, hey, here's what we've already done to fix this pipe, to upsize this pipe, to put in green infrastructure, and here's what's next. Here are the 5 projects that are rolling down. That's what's going to make the difference. Removing a ton or 2 of material in a watershed of this size is not going to make a significant difference. What we have to do and what we are doing is focusing on the engineering solution once and for all.
And I know you don't have a crystal ball, nobody knows what the next storm's gonna be like,
Mhm.
it's gonna be worse, it's gonna be less intense, but, you know, for the people who live in those neighborhoods who are worried that this storm is just gonna end up with the same result that the last storm was, what would you tell them?
What I tell them is that we have Emergency Operations Center is active. We have an incident command localized just to this area. This is police, fire, lifeguards, everyone. So we're ready, and we'll be, if for instance, we need to alert the neighbors, hey, this is going to be a problem, we have those boots on the ground now that will be able to do that and make them feel much more safe.
And do you think you'll be focusing in the southeastern San Diego?
Absolutely.
Could you repeat or be more specific about the work being done on Beta Street? You said you're starting with Beta, so what, are you able to do certain things with an emergency declaration that you can like skip over the Army Corps and stuff?
Sure, I can address that. So we can actually, because of the emergency declarations, we're able to use emergency provisions to do dredging. So that doesn't, we still have to get, it's after the fact permits, we have to notify all the regulatory agencies. I was on the call with the head of the Regional Water Quality Control Board today. We have to notify them. We actually have to get after the fact permits. So we have to do all the mitigation, we have to do all the regulatory things. It's after the fact. Fortunately, they're willing to work with us proactively. But what that entails is going in, starting in Beta Street, putting in heavy equipment and removing any and all vegetation that we can, anything that got washed into the storm drain channel. And I was there myself. I've seen what was washed into there. It's everything. And in a lot of cases, it's people's belongings. So it's something that we are addressing in advance of Thursday's storm. It might be nothing, the storm might be nothing, but we can't chance that. We have to do everything we can today.
So you're going with like backhoes and like gonna scrape it to the concrete bottom?
Scrape it, well, there's no concrete bottom in most cases. Choyas Creek, generally, there are pieces of concrete, but it's just a creek. It's not an engineered storm drain like you see in LA.
It's channelized.
It started as a creek. Parts of it are artificial, but there's mostly the bottom, you're not gonna find any concrete. So, yeah, and also you can't go too deep because remember, the floodplain goes outside and there are buildings in that floodplain. And that's important to recognize. And in some cases, the solution will have to be acquisition of property because the development back in the day, you couldn't actually do the type of development today that's there now. So when you actually have to, some of these capital improvement projects, when you see the footprint of them, it's going, of course, past the channel. The channel's not enough. And you can't, it's not a matter of just going deeper, because you go deeper, then you're going to be affecting people's properties, and we cannot do that. So that's another complex thing that I think people, I would like them to understand. There are some parts that we're seeing we're going to have to actually acquire property. That's very expensive. It's very impactful to the community, a community that desperately needs housing. So it's something we need to do very carefully and with their input.
I have a question from someone who texted me online, and she's asking about a project that never panned out, but she wants to explain that it's probably just in the regulatory permitting review process, but it's a Southcrest green infrastructure drainage system.
Yes, that's going into construction within 2 or 3 months.
2 or 3 months?
Yes.
Do you want to repeat that with the name of the
Sure.
project?
The Southcrest Green Infrastructure Project, that's about a $5 million project. That's actually, it's green infrastructure, so it's going to serve not only water quality, but it's going to improve the storm drains in the area and slow down some of these storms. That's actually in an advertisement with the contracting community, and we expect to break ground within 3 months.
Would it be helpful for you guys if you kind of explained some maps?
I don't understand the maps at all.
Okay, yeah.
Sure.
That's what I figured.
I-
So,
I have a question.
Mhm.
I just went literally before coming here to the area of Encanto, Hamacha Road.
Mhm.
Behind the house.
Yes.
Is that considered a creek or a canal? What is considered that one? It doesn't have an infrastructure like you mentioned.
Yeah, it doesn't have an infrastructure yet, but we're into final design to improve Hamashaw Channel. And that's one of the capital improvement projects we'll be able to share with you shortly to actually improve drainage in that area. It's desperately needed.
Can you explain, so on, behind 42nd Street, where it really flooded bad,
Mhm.
at least that's where it was dealt.
Yeah.
There are trees that are like 30 or 40 feet tall. Can you
Mhm.
explain what it takes for you to remove those trees? And I'm guessing what you're saying is there's dirt under there. So potentially they could grow back or something
Yeah.
else could grow back.
Well,
What does it take? I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of permits and.
Sure. It does require environmental permits. So vegetation, it's part of a wetland community, so it's regulated by Army Corps and Regional Water Quality Control Board and wildlife agencies. And it's habitat. So anytime we go in, before we do that type of work, we actually have to acquire authorization and permits, and we have to mitigate for that vegetation after the fact too.
can you explain that
And
it's
is
not?
that like a 10-year process? 3-year?
Well, if you do it one-off, it can take years. What we have done and worked with the regulatory agencies, we have a 5-year programmatic framework in place that allows us to streamline the process. Even when streamlined, it takes at least 2 years by the time to complete all the studies and get all the permits, about 2 years on average, and then you have to do the mitigation and pay for that too.
I mean, I get it, this is not the administration that's current fault or any, I don't know how far back. But this one lady showed up and she had a 1979 article.
Mhm.
And she's saying, look, this is 50, 40 years ago.
Yes.
And how is it that this has gone on this long?
Well, funding was a huge impediment, and that was the big win for this administration, getting that EPA $733 million that allowed us to do a lot of these projects that we had planned, but we never had the funding to execute on them, quite frankly. That was huge, and it's we need a dedicated funding source for stormwater to have ups and downs and ups and downs. If you start designing a project today, it takes a year or two to design. You have to have continuous funding that allows you to construct those projects. If you don't have that, then you're starting something without finishing it. So that's what, with the $733 million, that's going to allow us to finish a lot of things we started. And I think it is worth mentioning, yeah, the maps that we have out here, and these are available online. And I used to own a property. I used to live in a floodplain, so I'm very intimate with FEMA's website. But I think particularly if you look at the Beta Street map, there are 2 different colors, and you see the blue and you see the orange. So the blue, it's called what's the 100-year floodplain limit. So this is the area that would typically flood when you have a 100-year storm. So these have been mapped for decades. So there are structures here. So those are, of course, the most vulnerable, and this is one of the pieces of data that we use to help prioritize flood control. You do have the orange area, that's 500-year limit, so that's not regulated, so any building permit within the blue area, you build a new structure today, you have to raise that structure above that 100-year limit. This is a federal law. If you ask anyone, I used to live in Florida, so we have a lot of people in the floodplain there. Not as many here, but when you are in it, it's very critical. So the orange is not regulated from a construction standpoint, but to give you an idea, a 1,000-year storm, FEMA doesn't even map a 1,000-year storm. They go up to 500. And even that, you can see the impact. So when we talk about having to make improvements, in some cases, looking at not just widening the channel, that means we actually have to look at private property.
The Stormwater Department has like a $1.7 billion deficit, right? I mean, how much?
The deficit's in the billions of dollars when you look at over 20 years. It's something that we've been very strategically communicating. 2 years ago, there was a stormwater funding strategy presented That's online. It's really impactful. And what that does, it looks at not just flood control, but also water quality. We have a lot of regulatory requirements we have to meet from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, that we have to clean up water in certain areas. So that need is extraordinary. Yes.
How would you describe the deficit in terms of how quickly you can address some of these channel cleanings?
Currently, we're budgeted to do about four channel cleanings every year.
And you have how much channel in the city?
We have about 200 channel segments throughout the year, throughout the city.
How much mileage is that roughly? Do you have any idea?
It varies. When we say a channel segment, some can be very long, and some, but I think hazard a guess, probably 1,000 linear feet on average for a segment. Hazard a guess.
So about less than a mile every year?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not all of them need it every year. That's the good news. But some, of course, do need it more frequently than others.
What is the latest deficit number? If it's not 1.7, that was 2021. What is it?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I'm sure it's something we could provide it to you. Yeah.
Chris, I have a question from Greg Rand at iNewsSource, asking about the CIP Beta Street and 37th Alley, Green Alley.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it ever done? And if not, why not?
It isn't done yet, but I'm happy to report that we have funding for the actual design, and we're really hoping we have applied for $24 million for FEMA to fund this critical project. This is a Beta Street project that we've had envisioned for years. We have enough money thanks to the WIFIA funding I mentioned before, the $733 million. Part of that's going there. We're really counting on FEMA to step up and fund the $24 million. However, we know the full cost of that project. Just to give you an idea, this is just one segment out of Choice Creek. Over $50 million just for one segment.
Can you name that project again?
That's the Beta Street project.
And what would that work entail?
That work, it's upgrading and upsizing a lot of the storm drains that dump into that area, but you have to widen that whole area. If you've been there, and I was there just on Monday, you can see where it's restricted in some areas. And just maintaining it isn't enough. You actually, and you can't just start dredging, you can't start going in and cutting down slopes, because parcels are so close to the flood control channel here. I'd say it's probably one of the most challenging places to design anything, just because of the proximity of private property. When you go to design something today, if you're a land developer, you're going to have these wide swaths of stormwater channels. You go to Orange County, you see this all the time. I'm envious of them. They actually have very wide swaths, and then the houses are set back. It allows them to go in and allows that breathing room in that 100-year floodplain. What we have to do is try to get that as much as possible in an urbanized environment. It's extremely challenging, but we're committed to doing it.
Going back to Monday, how soon were residents notified that the city was responding? I know there was a press release that went out about just before 5 p.m.
Well, city staff were on that day, of course. We're working with communications department as that day. As you know, the city declared a state of emergency that day, and then there's a press conference held the very next day. I don't know if no.
I mean,
Just how soon they were given any sort of messaging that the city was responding, was moved for a dire situation?
do you mean in terms of rescue?
Yeah,
like
rescue.
Safety, like
Yes.
with fire department
Yes.
personnel out there? I mean, they were on scene, rescued hundreds of people in the area. That was
Well, yeah, and I was just, you answered my question already
Okay.
about the press conference following.
Okay. Maybe gentlemen first, or?
So you said that most of the projects are going to start building in 2 or 3 months. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says that right now we're in kind of the peak of the Nino. That gives us enough time for this to not to happen. And also, they also prognosticate this one has more water rivers than the 1970s one. It is more severe.
Yes.
Does that give us enough time for this not to happen in those 3 or 4 months?
Well, again,
Summarize that.
yeah, the question was, with the El Nino prediction, do we have enough time to do everything? The answer is, if we get another 1,000-year flood event, it's going to happen again. the only way to do anything differently is actually to widen the channel. That said, we are with the emergency provisions and the contracting and the contractors we have on site, that's going to help. Will it protect us from a 1,000-year storm? No, it will not.
Put in the name of a 1,000-year storm is just, it can happen. A 1,000-year storm in.
Usually it's a,
What the sign of a 1,000
it's a 0.01% chance of happening every year. So generally, you would never, in a lifetime, it's something you would not expect to observe.
I
Yes.
don't know if you addressed this about the Cottonwood Street, the canal that runs next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people address the situation, the flooding to that. They say for years they have been asking the city to clean it, and it hasn't. Do you have any records when was the last time that specific canal was actually cleaned?
I don't off the top of my head, but I'm sure we can research it. What I'd encourage people to understand is, like we mentioned, Choice Creek is huge, and you have to be strategic. So if we will do dredging in some places that it's going to impact you in front of your house. Like upstream, if we can address a lot of things, and downstream, if we remove plugs, that's a benefit to you, and you might not even know we're doing anything. So Cottonwood Creek, I don't have off the top of my head, but we'll definitely research that and see.
Another question, now that the water, descended, I can see, like you mentioned, furnitures, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And we have rains coming up next week.
Yes.
What would be the advice to do it? Should people start cleaning by themselves or just wait for the city to do it? People scare, and I have a live swimmer right now.
Sure.
They want to know what's going to happen because they're very, very scared right now. There's rain coming, and we have everything that was dragged along with what was it already?
Yeah.
Just can you send a message to them
Sure.
right now?
Summarize the rest.
Sure. The question is, what can people do to prepare for the next storm, and what is the city doing to prepare for the next storm? One request I would make of residents, and I've seen pictures, and like I said, I was there on Monday. Whatever you can do to remove your cars from the right-of-way will dramatically help our crews help you. I cannot emphasize that enough. Hopefully by now they've contacted their homeowner's insurance, their car insurance. Hopefully the car insurance will cover removal of that vehicle. We're strategizing on, for those people who are unable to do so, what are options for that. We'll be pushing that out later. But number one, that would be the request I would have. It would really help our crews out tremendously, because these men and women have been out there day and night to make things safe. What the city is doing now, not only clearing the roads to make sure it's passable and trying to get the community back to normal as quickly as possible, but it's also in-house crews. Like I said, we're going to be this week in Beta Street starting dredging, removing that material from Choice Creek, working upstream, and at the same time bringing on contractors later this week, early next week, in advance of the storm, to remove as much of that material as possible.
The funding for these, upcoming projects and everything, could that be assisted by, like the presidential emergency declaration? And, if so, if the city is pursuing that, kind of where is the city in that process?
Absolutely. Because we've enacted the Emergency Operations Center, and because all of the declarations, we're currently tracking city expenditures to see what we can do to actually get reimbursed. Working with FEMA to see proactively what funds can we get for emergency response. We're also able to work with our friends in the county and in the state to see what other resources, if we need any resources to be brought down to help us now. Funding is a key component. We're going to be seeking a lot of that from the federal government.
But there's no, steps being taken towards that presidential, declaration?
Yes.
Okay.
We're anticipating getting some information out to all of you today about all that.
I apologize. I actually do have to go meet with Secretary Crowfoot. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And I'll send out these maps to all of you. The same media list that got you here today.
Thank you.
But you all know where to find me. If you don't do it, thanks.
I just want to understand.
Nope. Not the guy.
Do you understand?
What about
I
it,
just
though?
need some general.
I'm not an engineer.
So
everything around